He wasn't supposed to walk toward a dog like that. Not blind, not alone, not when everyone else had already stepped back. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? And if you've ever believed that something broken can still choose to protect instead of harm, stay with me. Because this story begins with a moment that looked like danger, but wasn't. The chain rattles first, low and metallic, dragging across concrete like a warning whispered too late. And then comes the breath, heavy, controlled, the kind of breath that belongs to something trained to hold the line even when the world turns uncertain. And in the dim fluorescent light of a county shelter just outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, every sound feels sharper than it should, bouncing off cold walls that smell faintly of disinfectant and wet fur. A place where time doesn't pass so much as it waits. Rex stands at the far end of the kennel, still as a statue carved from tension, a retired police dog with a reputation that has grown louder than his silence. Ears forward, amber eyes locked on movement no one else dares to approach, the staff keeping their distance, voices hushed, not out of cruelty, but caution, because stories travel faster than truth in places like this, and his story has already been decided for him. They say he's unpredictable. They say he's not safe. They say it like a verdict. And then there is Daniel Hayes, standing just inside the doorway, shoulders squared in a way that doesn't come from confidence, but from habit, from years of learning how to face what you cannot see, his dark glasses catching the overhead light, hiding eyes that no longer register the world the way they used to, a blind veteran who moves carefully, not slowly, each step measured in inches, in memory, in sound. His right hand brushing lightly along the wall as if reading it, fingertips tracing, chipped paint and cool concrete, grounding himself in a space that offers no welcome. He wasn't supposed to come here. Not alone. Not to this kennel. Someone had told him there were calmer dogs, easier matches, animals trained to guide, to comfort, to follow predictable patterns, but Daniel didn't ask for easy. He asked for real, and real doesn't always come with a warning label you can trust. A volunteer shifts uneasily near the entrance, arms folded, voice low but firm. Sir, I wouldn't go any closer. The words hang there, suspended between concern and fear, but Daniel doesn't turn toward the voice, because sound is something he follows, not something he obeys. And instead he tilts his head slightly, listening, mapping the space through echoes, through breath, through the subtle scrape of nails against concrete that tells him exactly where Rex is standing, exactly how still he is, exactly how much tension sits coiled in that silence. Another step forward. The chain tightens. The air changes. You can feel it even without seeing it, like the moment before a storm decides whether to pass or break. Somewhere behind him, someone inhales sharply, the kind of breath people take when they're already preparing for the worst outcome, already imagining the lunge, the snap, the confirmation of everything they've been told about this dog. But Daniel keeps moving. Not reckless, not unaware, just certain in a way that doesn't need sight to exist. His boots press softly against the floor, each footfall deliberate, steady, and when he stops, he is closer than anyone has dared to stand in weeks, close enough now to hear not just the chain, not just the breath, but the subtle shift of weight, the almost imperceptible movement of muscle under fur, the language of a creature that has spent its life responding to commands and now waits for one that never comes. Hey, Daniel says quietly, his voice calm, unforced, not reaching, not demanding, just present, like he's speaking to someone sitting beside him instead of something everyone else fears. And there's no tremor in it, no edge of hesitation, only a kind of stillness that meets Rex's own. The dog's ears twitch. A low sound forms, not quite a growl, not quite a warning, something in between, something searching. Another step. Too close now. Too close for comfort. Too close for logic. The chain pulls taut with a sharp metallic snap that echoes down the kennel, and for a fraction of a second, everything holds its breath, time stretching. Thin, fragile, like it could break if anyone moves too fast, and then Rex shifts forward, sudden, powerful, the kind of motion that makes people flinch before they even understand why. A movement that looks like a decision already made, like a story about to prove itself true. And somewhere behind Daniel, someone whispers, "No," but Daniel doesn't step back. He doesn't raise his hands. He doesn't retreat into the safety everyone else chose. He just stands there, listening, feeling the air, the vibration of movement, the presence of something inches away, and in that narrow space between fear and understanding, something unseen begins to change. The movement stops inches short of him, not with impact, not with the sound everyone feared, but with a sudden, controlled halt that feels almost impossible for something built on instinct. And for a moment, the only thing that exists in that narrow space between man and dog is breath, slow and measured, rising and falling like two rhythms trying to find the same beat. And Daniel does not flinch because he hears it. The difference, the space between aggression and restraint, the way Rex holds himself back not out of confusion, but choice. And that choice carries weight, the kind that does not come from training alone, but from something deeper, something remembered. The chain slackens just slightly, a faint metallic whisper against the floor, and Rex shifts his stance, not retreating, not advancing, just adjusting, as if recalibrating what he thought this moment would be, his head lowering a fraction, ears still forward but no longer rigid, the tension in his body easing in increments too small for most people to notice. But Daniel notices because sound is not just noise to him. It is shape. It is distance. It is truth without distraction. He exhales slowly, steady, letting the air leave his lungs in a controlled release that mirrors the calm he is offering, not forcing it, not pretending, just existing in it. And then he speaks again, softer this time, almost like a thought-given voice. You do not have to prove anything. The words hang there, simple, unadorned, but something in them lands, something in them reaches a place that commands never did, because Rex has heard commands his entire life, sharp voices, clear expectations, do this, do not do that, hold, release, track, stop. But this is different. This is not instruction. This is recognition, and recognition is something he has not been given in a long time. A faint sound leaves the dog, not a growl, not a bark, something quieter, almost like a question, and Daniel tilts his head slightly, listening, absorbing it, responding not with movement, but with presence, his hand lifting slowly, deliberately, palm open, not reaching forward yet, just existing in the space between them, offering without taking, and the stillness that follows is heavier than anything that came before, because now the choice is no longer Daniel's, it belongs to Rex entirely. Somewhere behind them, the volunteer shifts again, the faint rustle of fabric, the creak of a shoe against concrete. But no one speaks, because something is happening that does not belong to interruption, something fragile and precise, like the moment ice begins to melt without anyone noticing the exact second it changed. Rex lowers his head another inch, his breath brushing against Daniel's hand, warm, steady, carrying the scent of something familiar beneath the antiseptic air, something like dust and sun and long days spent outside. And Daniel does not pull away. He does not rush. He simply lets that breath exist, lets the dog decide the distance. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, Rex leans forward. It is not a lunge. It is not a test. It is a shift of weight, a quiet step into trust that looks nothing like the stories told about him. And when his nose finally touches Daniel's palm, it is soft, tentative, as if confirming something he cannot see but can feel, something that does not carry fear or expectation, only steadiness. Daniel's fingers move then, just slightly, brushing against the coarse fur along Rex's muzzle, not gripping, not holding, just acknowledging, and the contact sends a ripple through the dog's posture, a release of tension that travels from head to tail, subtle but undeniable, like a knot loosening after being pulled too tight for too long. Another breath, another moment, and then Rex does something no one in that room expected. He steps closer, closing the remaining distance on his own, his shoulder aligning with Daniel's leg, not pressing, not crowding, just there, present, solid. And when Daniel's hand follows, resting lightly against the side of his neck, the chain falls completely slack, pooling on the floor with a soft metallic clink that echoes louder than it should in the quiet. The room shifts with it. The air changes. The fear that filled it just moments ago does not vanish, but it loosens, replaced by something quieter, something uncertain but hopeful, the kind of feeling that does not announce itself loudly but settles in slowly, like light filtering through a window no one realized had been opened. Daniel's shoulders lowered just a fraction, the first visible sign of ease since he stepped into the kennel, and he lets his hand remain where it is, fingers resting in the thick fur, feeling the steady rise and fall beneath them. The life, the presence, the truth of something that was never what they said it was. Yeah, he murmurs, barely above a whisper. I hear you. And Rex, the dog everyone feared, does not move away. He stays. Not because he is told to, not because he is trained to, but because for the first time in a long time, someone has listened without needing to see. And in that quiet understanding, something begins to take shape, something that neither of them expected, something that does not need to be named yet, because it is still too new, too fragile, but it is there, undeniable, growing in the space where fear used to live. The silence does not break all at once, it loosens slowly, like a grip that finally realizes it no longer needs to hold so tight. And in that quiet shift, something else begins to surface, something beneath the moment itself, something that had always been there waiting to be understood, and Daniel feels it first not through sight, but through the subtle changes in the dog's breathing. The way Rex's chest rises deeper now, fuller, no longer held in that rigid half-breath of readiness, but expanding as if the air itself has become safe again, and Daniel's hand remains steady against his neck, fingers resting in the thick fur, reading the small tremors that pass through muscle and memory, because this is how he understands the world now, not through what is seen, but through what is felt, what is heard, what is true without needing explanation. Somewhere beyond the kennel, a door closes softly, distant, and the faint hum of an old ventilation system continues its low, constant rhythm. But inside this space, time feels altered, stretched, like it is giving them room to arrive at something neither of them expected to find. Rex shifts again, not away, but closer, his body angling just enough that his shoulder brushes Daniel's leg with quiet intention, and it is not an accident, not a misstep, it is a choice, and that choice carries a meaning that goes beyond training, beyond instinct. It is recognition, and Daniel understands it without needing words. You were working, he says quietly, his voice carrying that same steady calm, not asking, not assuming, just stating what feels true, and the dog responds in the only way he knows how now, with stillness that is no longer defensive but grounded, like a soldier standing watch not because he is ordered to, but because he believes in what he is protecting. The chain lies untouched between them, a forgotten line that once defined distance, now reduced to nothing more than metal on concrete, and Daniel slowly lowers himself, bending at the knees until he is kneeling beside Rex, bringing himself down to the same level, not above, not below, just equal. And the shift is subtle but powerful, because equality is something both of them have been denied in different ways, one labeled incapable, the other labeled dangerous, both misunderstood by a world that prefers simple explanations over complicated truths. His hand moves gently along Rex's shoulder, feeling the old strength there, the muscle that still holds memory of purpose, and beneath it, something else, something quieter, something like fatigue, not of the body, but of being seen the wrong way for too long. They stopped listening. Daniel murmurs, almost to himself, and the words do not carry bitterness, only a kind of quiet understanding that comes from having lived through the same kind of silence, the same kind of being overlooked, misjudged, placed into a category that does not fit the whole of who you are. Rex exhales slowly, a long breath that seems to release more than just air, and his head lowers slightly until it rests near Daniel's shoulder, not pressing, not demanding, just present, and Daniel accepts it without hesitation, his posture adjusting naturally, as if this connection had always been there waiting for the right moment to surface. In the far corner of the room, someone shifts again, the faint sound of disbelief carried in a whisper too quiet to form words, because what they are witnessing does not match the story they were told, and people struggle with that, with the idea that what they believed might not be complete, might not be fair. Daniel does not hear the doubt in the same way, but he senses the change in the room, the way the air no longer feels tight, the way the fear has softened into something uncertain, and he lets that be, because this moment does not belong to explanation, it belongs to presence. His fingers pause near the base of Rex's neck, feeling a small ridge beneath the fur, an old scar perhaps, a remnant of a past that has not been fully understood, and he does not ask about it, because he knows that not every story needs to be told out loud to be honored. Some are carried in silence, in the way a body moves, in the way a breath catches and then steadies again. "You are still on duty, aren't you?" he says softly, and this time there is something different in his tone, not just understanding, but respect, the kind that recognizes purpose even when the world has decided it is no longer needed. And Rex responds with the smallest shift, a grounding of his stance, a quiet affirmation that does not require sound, because some truths do not need to be spoken to be known. The fluorescent light above flickers once, briefly, and then steadies, casting a pale glow over the scene. But Daniel does not notice the light. He notices the warmth beneath his hand, the steady rhythm of a heart that has not given up, and in that rhythm, he finds something familiar, something that echoes his own, a resilience that does not ask for recognition but endures anyway. "It is okay," he says, the words carrying a softness that is not weakness but strength held gently. "You do not have to fight anymore." And for a moment, nothing changes, and then everything does, because Rex shifts his weight fully into him, not leaning for support, but sharing it, a quiet redistribution of burden that neither of them names, but both of them feel. And in that shared stillness, something settles into place, something that has been missing for longer than either of them can measure, something like belonging, something like peace, not loud, not overwhelming, just present, steady, real, like the first breath after a long silence finally breaks. The moment does not rush forward. It deepens, settling into something quieter than relief and heavier than coincidence. And Daniel remains where he is, kneeling on the cold concrete, one hand resting against Rex's neck, the other loosely balanced on his own knee, his posture no longer guarded but grounded, as if he has found a center he did not know he was searching for. And Rex stays beside him, not restless, not uncertain, but anchored, his body aligned with Daniel's in a way that feels deliberate, protective without tension, present without demand. And for a long second, nothing moves, nothing needs to, because the silence itself has become full, carrying more meaning than any explanation could. Then, from somewhere just beyond the kennel, a new sound enters, subtle at first, a faint clatter, something small shifting against metal, followed by the uneven scrape of a rolling cart, its wheels slightly misaligned, creating a rhythm that is off just enough to stand out against the steady hum of the room. And Daniel's head tilts instinctively toward it, mapping the distance, the direction, while Rex reacts differently, not with curiosity, but with immediate awareness, his posture tightening, just slightly, not in fear, not in aggression, but in alertness, the kind that does not come from instinct alone, but from training that has never fully left him. The chain does not move this time. Rex does not pull. He simply shifts his weight forward, placing himself half a step ahead of Daniel, his body creating a quiet barrier, not blocking forcefully, but positioning with intention, and Daniel feels it instantly, the subtle change in space, the way the air moves differently when something stands between you and a sound you cannot see. "What is it?" Daniel asks softly, not turning, not reaching, trusting the information that comes through presence rather than sight. And Rex answers not with sound, but with stillness sharpened into focus, his ears angled toward the approaching noise, his breath steady but more deliberate now, each inhale measured, each exhale controlled. The cart comes closer, the uneven rhythm growing louder, and with it, another layer emerges, a faint scent carried through the air, something chemical, sharp, unfamiliar in its intensity. And Daniel catches it a second later, his brow tightening slightly, not from alarm, but from recognition of something out of place, and he shifts his weight just enough to adjust his balance, ready without knowing exactly why. The volunteer at the doorway hesitates, then takes a step forward, her voice tentative. "It is just supplies," she says, more to reassure herself than anyone else. But Rex does not relax, because this is not about what something is supposed to be. It is about what it feels like, what it sounds like, what it carries beneath the surface. And he has learned, over years that were not gentle, to trust that difference. Another inch forward. The cart wobbles. Something rattles loose on its surface, a small metal container shifting dangerously close to the edge, and in that fraction of a second, Before anyone else fully registers what is about to happen, Rex moves. Not forward in attack, not with force, but with precision, stepping closer to Daniel, his shoulder pressing firmly but carefully against Daniel's side, guiding him half a step back, just enough, just in time, and the container slips from the cart, falling to the floor with a sharp metallic clang that echoes louder than expected in the enclosed space, rolling across the concrete before coming to rest near the kennel gate. No harm, no damage, just noise. But the moment carries weight, because what could have startled, could have confused, could have broken the fragile calm, instead becomes something else entirely. Daniel steadies himself, his hand instinctively returning to Rex's neck, fingers finding the same place as before, grounding, and he exhales slowly, understanding not through sight but through sequence, through timing, through the unmistakable clarity of intention behind the movement. "You saw it coming," he says quietly, and there is no question in his voice, only recognition, and Rex's body eases again, the alertness fading not into uncertainty, but into completion, as if a task has been fulfilled, a responsibility quietly met. The volunteer stands frozen for a moment, eyes wide, then exhales, a soft breath of realization breaking through her earlier fear, and the room shifts again, this time more noticeably, because now there is evidence, something tangible that does not match the story they believed, something that asks them to reconsider, not loudly, not forcefully, but undeniably. Daniel's hand moves slowly along Rex's shoulder once more, a gentle acknowledgement, and his voice lowers, almost a whisper. "You were never the problem, were you?" And the words settle into the space between them like truth finally spoken aloud, not for explanation, but for release. Rex does not respond with sound, but he does not need to, because his presence says enough, steady, grounded, unchanged in the face of misunderstanding. And in that quiet aftermath, something becomes clear, not just to Daniel, but to everyone watching, something simple and profound at the same time, that what they feared was never danger. It was purpose without context, loyalty without translation, and now, standing in the stillness of a shelter that no longer feels as cold as it did before, that truth begins to take root. The sound of the metal container settling on the floor fades, but what lingers is not the noise. It is the understanding that follows it, quiet and undeniable. And Daniel remains still for a moment longer, his hand resting against Rex, as if confirming what he already knows, that the movement was not reaction but intention, not instinct but choice. And when he finally shifts, it is slow, deliberate, his weight adjusting as he begins to rise from the cold concrete, one hand lightly trailing along Rex's shoulder for balance. Not because he cannot stand alone, but because the connection between them has already formed into something natural, something unspoken yet steady. Rex moves with him, not pulling, not leading, but matching, step for step, his presence aligned just slightly ahead and to the side. The way he placed himself before, not by command, not by training alone, but by something that feels remembered, something that has found its way back without being asked. And as Daniel straightens fully, his posture shifts in a way that is subtle but clear. The tension that once sat in his shoulders now replaced by a grounded stillness, a quiet confidence that does not come from sight, but from trust. The volunteer near the doorway exhales again, this time slower, her earlier hesitation replaced by something closer to awe, and she takes a careful step forward, her voice softer now, stripped of the caution it carried before. "I have never seen him do that," she says, and the words are not dramatic, not exaggerated, just honest, carrying the weight of someone who thought they understood a situation and is now realizing they did not. Daniel turns his head slightly toward her voice, acknowledging it without breaking the moment, his hand still resting lightly against Rex's neck, fingers moving in a slow, absent motion, not petting, not distracting, just maintaining contact, as if both of them are still adjusting to the reality of what has just happened. "He knew," Daniel replies quietly, and there is no need to explain further, because the truth of it is already present in the room, visible even to those who had doubted it, carried in the way Rex stands now, calm, steady, aware but not tense, his ears relaxed, his breathing even, the edge of alertness no longer sharp, but softened into readiness without fear. A second staff member steps closer, cautiously at first, then more assured, her footsteps measured against the concrete floor, and she pauses just outside the kennel gate. Her eyes moving between Daniel and Rex as if trying to reconcile two versions of the same story, the one she believed and the one she is now witnessing. And for a moment, she says nothing, because sometimes silence is the only honest response to something that does not fit expectations. Daniel shifts his weight slightly, his free hand lowering to his side, and Rex adjusts with him, maintaining that same quiet alignment, not out of obligation, but out of presence, and the chain that once defined his movement remains untouched, lying slack and forgotten, its purpose rendered unnecessary by something far stronger than restraint. "Can you open the gate?" Daniel asks, his voice calm, steady, not demanding, just certain, and the question carries a weight that settles into the room, because it is not just about the physical barrier, it is about trust, about whether the people around them are ready to accept what has already been proven in front of them. The volunteer hesitates for only a second, then nods, her hand reaching for the latch, fingers pausing briefly as if acknowledging the significance of the moment, and then she lifts it, the soft click of metal releasing into a sound that feels far louder than it should, and the gate swings open with a slow, measured movement. Rex does not rush forward. He does not test the boundary. He remains exactly where he is, beside Daniel, his posture unchanged, his focus steady, as if the absence of the barrier means nothing compared to the presence of the connection he has already chosen. Daniel takes a single step forward, cautious but unafraid, and Rex moves with him, matching that step, maintaining the same position, not ahead, not behind, but beside, and as they cross the threshold together, something shifts in the room that cannot be measured in sound or sight, something that exists in the space between understanding and belief. The staff watches in silence, their earlier assumptions dissolving not in dramatic revelation, but in quiet recognition, and Daniel pauses just beyond the kennel, turning slightly as if orienting himself to the new space, his hand still resting lightly against Rex, grounding both of them in the moment. "You are not done," he says softly, the words directed toward the dog, but carrying meaning far beyond it. And Rex's ears lift just slightly, not in tension, but in acknowledgement, as if something within him recognizes the truth of those words, something that had been waiting for someone to see it, to say it, to believe it. The fluorescent lights hum above them, the air still carrying that faint scent of disinfectant and metal, but the atmosphere is no longer cold, no longer distant. It has shifted into something warmer, something human, something alive with possibility. And Daniel takes another step, then another, each movement steady, measured, and Rex remains with him, not as a shadow, not as a tool, but as a partner. His presence quiet but unmistakable, his purpose no longer hidden behind fear or misunderstanding, but beginning, slowly, to be seen for what it truly is. They do not stop at the kennel threshold, not immediately, because the world outside that narrow space feels wider, louder, filled with layers Daniel cannot see but can sense through the subtle shifts in air, the faint echoes of footsteps, the distant hum of a door opening somewhere down the hall, and Rex adjusts without being asked, his body angling just slightly ahead now, not pulling, not leading with force, but guiding with presence, the kind of movement that does not need instruction, because it remembers what it was built to do, and Daniel notices it instantly, the way the space in front of him seems to clear, the way obstacles are no longer uncertain shapes, but something anticipated, softened by the dog's quiet positioning. His hand remains near Rex's shoulder, not gripping, not holding, just resting close enough to feel the rhythm of movement. And as they take another step forward, then another, the distance between hesitation and trust begins to close in a way that feels almost natural, as if this path had always existed, waiting for the moment it could be walked. The staff members follow at a distance, their footsteps slower, quieter, as if they are witnessing something that should not be interrupted, and the earlier tension that once defined the room has transformed into something else entirely, something thoughtful, reflective, the kind of silence that comes when people realize they have been wrong about something important. Daniel pauses near the center of the hallway, his head turning slightly as he listens, mapping the space again, recalibrating his sense of distance, and Rex stops with him, perfectly still, not shifting, not wandering, his focus steady, his posture relaxed but attentive, the balance between readiness and calm that only comes from experience. "You used to do this," Daniel says quietly, his voice carrying that same measured tone, and it is not a question, not a guess, but an understanding that has grown clearer with each step, and Rex's ears lift slightly, not in tension, but in acknowledgement, as if the words have reached something within him that recognizes truth when it is spoken. A door opens somewhere to their left, the sound sharp but not alarming, and a faint draft of cooler air moves through the hallway, brushing lightly against Daniel's face, carrying with it the scent of the outside, distant, subtle, but present, and Rex shifts just enough to adjust their path, guiding Daniel a few inches to the right, away from the edge of a rolling cart that had been left partially in the walkway, and Daniel follows without hesitation, his steps aligning with that quiet correction as if it had always been part of his movement. "Yeah," he murmurs softly, almost to himself. "You remember." And there is something in his voice now that was not there before, not just calm, not just trust, but something deeper, something like recognition meeting recognition, two separate histories aligning in a way that neither of them expected. They continue forward, the rhythm of their steps settling into something steady, something shared, and with each foot of distance, the idea of separation, of uncertainty, of fear, becomes less relevant, replaced by a growing sense of direction, not just physical, but something more internal, something that feels like purpose beginning to return in quiet, steady increments. The hallway stretches ahead, about 20 feet of polished concrete leading toward a glass door that reflects light in a way Daniel cannot see but can feel through the slight warmth it casts into the space, and Rex moves toward it with calm precision, his pace unhurried, his body maintaining that same gentle alignment beside Daniel, guiding without control, supporting without force. Behind them, one of the staff members speaks softly, almost to herself. He is guiding him, and the words carry a tone of disbelief softened by wonder, as if she is witnessing something that challenges everything she thought she understood, and Daniel hears it, not the words alone, but the shift behind them, the change in perception, and he does not respond, because he does not need to. The truth is already present in every step they take. As they near the door, Rex slows slightly, his body adjusting once more, positioning himself just enough to signal the change in space ahead. The threshold, the slight rise where the door frame meets the floor, and Daniel responds instinctively, his foot lifting just a fraction higher, clearing the edge without hesitation, and the movement is small, almost invisible, but it carries significance, because it is the first step guided not by memory alone, not by habit, but by trust placed in something outside himself. They step through together, the door opening with a soft mechanical sigh, and the air shifts again, cooler now, touched by the outside, carrying faint traces of grass and distant asphalt, and Daniel pauses just beyond it, taking in the change, not through sight, but through sensation, the way the space feels wider, less contained, more open, and Rex stands beside him, steady, grounded, his presence unchanged despite the new environment, as if the location itself is irrelevant compared to the connection that now defines their movement. "You are still working," Daniel says quietly, and this time there is a softness in his voice that carries something close to gratitude, not spoken loudly, not emphasized, but present, and Rex's tail shifts just slightly, not a wag, not exaggerated, just a subtle movement that signals something internal, something settled, something at ease. The staff stops at the doorway, watching, not interfering, because what is happening now does not belong to instruction or control. It belongs to something quieter, something that cannot be recreated or forced, and Daniel takes another step forward, then another, his pace steady, his posture aligned with the dog beside him. And for the first time since he entered the shelter, his movement does not carry hesitation, it carries direction. Rex remains at his side, not as something feared, not as something misunderstood, but as something recognized, something that has found its place again not through command, but through connection. And as they move into the open air, the line between what was and what is begins to fade, replaced by something simpler, something stronger, something that does not need to be named to be understood. The open air does not rush at them. It settles gently, like a quiet hand placed over a restless heart, and Daniel stands just beyond the doorway, still for a moment, letting the world reintroduce itself not through sight, but through sensation. The faint warmth of late afternoon sun brushing against his face, the subtle shift of wind moving across the parking lot, carrying with it the distant hum of passing cars and the soft rustle of leaves somewhere beyond the edge of the building, and Rex remains beside him, steady, grounded, his presence unchanged despite the wider space, his posture relaxed but attentive, as if the transition from inside to outside has not altered his purpose, only expanded it. Daniel inhales slowly, drawing in the air, letting it fill his lungs with something that feels different from the sterile stillness behind them, something more alive, more open, and he tilts his head slightly, listening, mapping the new environment with careful precision, the faint echo of footsteps fading behind them, the distant clink of a gate closing, the low murmur of voices that do not follow, because the people inside have chosen to let this moment belong to something beyond their control. Rex shifts his weight just slightly, his body angling forward again, not pulling, not urging, but offering direction, and Daniel responds instinctively, taking a step that aligns with that quiet guidance, his hand hovering near the dog's shoulder, not needing to hold, just needing to feel, and together they move forward across the concrete, the texture beneath Daniel's boots changing subtly with each step, small variations that tell him where he is without needing to see it. A faint sound approaches from the left, the rhythmic tapping of something light against the ground, followed by the soft roll of rubber wheels, and Rex slows, his ears lifting just enough to catch the movement, his body adjusting in a way that gently redirects Daniel a few inches to the right, creating space before the object fully enters their path, and a moment later, a young boy passes by on a small scooter, the wheels humming quietly against the pavement, his laughter brief and bright, before it fades into the distance, and Daniel's lips curve slightly, not into a full smile, but into something softer, something that acknowledges the moment without needing to hold on to it. "You are watching everything, aren't you?" he murmurs, his voice low, calm, and Rex's tail shifts once, a small, contained motion that carries no excitement, no tension, just acknowledgement, as if the statement itself is enough. They continue forward, the distance between steps settling into a rhythm that feels natural, unforced, and as they move, the world around them begins to take shape in Daniel's mind, not as images, but as patterns of sound and space, the faint echo of a metal fence about 10 feet ahead, the slight incline of the pavement rising just enough to be noticed, and Rex adjusts again, slowing his pace just before the incline, allowing Daniel to register the change, to shift his weight accordingly, and then guiding him forward with the same quiet precision that has defined every movement since they stepped outside. Behind them, the shelter fades into the background, its sounds growing softer, less immediate, and Daniel does not turn back, because whatever existed there has already changed, already settled into something complete, and what lies ahead now carries a different kind of weight, something undefined but steady, something that feels like continuation rather than conclusion. A car door closes somewhere nearby, the sound sharp but distant, followed by the low hum of an engine starting, and Rex pauses briefly, his posture still calm but more focused, his ears angled toward the sound, assessing, processing, and then, just as quietly, he resumes, guiding Daniel a few steps further away from the edge of the parking lot, creating distance without urgency, without fear, just awareness, and Daniel follows without question, his trust no longer tentative, no longer forming, but present, solid, rooted in something that has already proven itself. "You kept doing your job," Daniel says softly, the words carrying a quiet respect that does not need emphasis, and Rex walks beside him, steady, unshaken, as if the acknowledgement itself is enough, as if recognition has replaced the need for explanation. The breeze shifts again, slightly stronger now, brushing against Daniel's jacket, carrying with it the faint scent of grass and sun-warmed asphalt, and he inhales it slowly, grounding himself in the moment, in the space, in the presence of the dog beside him, and for a brief second, the weight he has carried for so long feels lighter, not gone, not erased, but shared, redistributed in a way that does not demand anything in return. They reach the edge of the walkway, where the concrete meets a strip of grass that runs along the perimeter of the lot, and Rex slows once more, his body aligning just enough to signal the boundary. The change in texture, and Daniel stops, his foot hovering for a fraction of a second before lowering onto the softer ground. The shift immediate and clear beneath him, and he exhales quietly, a breath that carries something close to relief. Feels different, he says, almost to himself, and Rex remains beside him, steady, grounded, his presence unchanged, as if the environment does not define the connection, only supports it. For a moment, they stand there, at the edge of one space and the beginning of another, and the world around them continues to move, cars passing in the distance, leaves shifting in the breeze, voices fading in and out. But within that motion, there is a stillness that belongs only to them, something quiet, something certain, something that does not need to be named to be understood. And as Daniel takes another step forward onto the grass, Rex moves with him, not as something feared, not as something misunderstood, but as something chosen, something trusted, something that has found its place again in the simple act of walking beside someone who finally sees without needing eyes. The grass gives slightly beneath Daniel's boots, softer than concrete, less predictable, and he pauses for just a moment to feel it, to understand it, the way it shifts under weight, the way it carries a faint coolness even in the warmth of the afternoon, and Rex adjusts with him, not moving ahead, not urging forward, but holding position at his side, allowing the moment of recalibration to settle fully before guiding again. Because this is not about speed, it is about awareness, about building something that does not break under uncertainty. A breeze moves through again, stronger this time, brushing against Daniel's face and jacket, carrying the layered scent of open space, grass, distant pavement, and something else, something faint but familiar, like sun-warmed wood or the edge of a park just beyond reach. And Daniel inhales slowly, letting it anchor him, letting it replace the sterile memory of the shelter with something broader, something that feels less confined. Rex's ears flick once, catching a sound carried in that same breeze, distant but distinct, the low hum of an approaching vehicle somewhere off to the right, and his posture shifts subtly, not tense, not reactive, but attentive, his body angling just slightly, so that his position naturally guides Daniel away from that direction without the need for force, and Daniel follows, his step adjusting in alignment with the dog's quiet correction, his trust now immediate, unhesitating, because it has already been tested and proven in ways that do not need repetition. You always listen first, Daniel murmurs, his voice calm, thoughtful, and Rex continues forward, steady, as if the observation itself is simply part of what is already known. The ground changes again beneath Daniel's feet, a narrow strip of gravel cutting across the grass, each small stone shifting slightly under pressure, creating a faint crunch with every step, and Rex slows just enough to signal the difference. His movement giving Daniel time to adjust his footing, to feel the instability before committing weight fully, and Daniel responds instinctively, his stride shortening slightly, his balance shifting, his awareness expanding to match the new texture. A sound breaks through the quiet, closer now, the gentle rhythm of footsteps approaching from ahead, accompanied by the soft jingle of keys and the low murmur of a voice speaking on a phone, and Rex pauses, his body still, his ears forward, assessing, and Daniel stops with him, not questioning, not reacting, just waiting, and a moment later, a man passes by at a distance of a few feet, his pace steady, his conversation continuing uninterrupted, the sound of his shoes fading gradually as he moves past, and Rex remains still until the space is clear again, then resumes, guiding Daniel forward with the same calm precision. Clear, Daniel says softly, more a confirmation than a question, and Rex's tail shifts once, a small motion that carries agreement without sound. The path ahead opens into a wider area, the grass stretching out more evenly, the sounds of the road now slightly farther away, softened by distance, and Daniel senses it through the way the air feels less compressed, less directional, and he takes a deeper breath, his shoulders easing just slightly, his posture no longer carrying the subtle tension that had once defined his movement, because now there is something else present, something steady, something shared. Rex moves forward at an even pace, not rushing, not hesitating, his body maintaining that same quiet alignment, his presence both guide and companion. And as they walk, the rhythm between them becomes more fluid, more natural, each step less deliberate, more intuitive, as if they are no longer two separate movements, but one continuous flow. "You were not wrong," Daniel says after a moment, his voice carrying a quiet certainty, and the words settle into the space between them, not as a correction, not as a defense, but as recognition, and Rex continues beside him, unchanged, steady, as if the acknowledgement itself is enough. A faint sound emerges from ahead, lighter this time, the distant laughter of children carried through the air, mixed with the soft creak of something wooden shifting, perhaps a bench or a small play structure, and Rex adjusts again, his pace slowing slightly, his body angling just enough to keep Daniel on a path that avoids the uneven edges of a worn dirt patch nearby, guiding him toward firmer ground without needing to signal more than presence. And Daniel follows, his steps aligning with that. Subtle redirection, his trust now fully integrated into his movement. The sunlight shifts as a cloud passes overhead, the warmth on Daniel's face softening, the air cooling just slightly, and he notices it, not as a visual change, but as a sensation, a quiet dimming that carries its own kind of calm, and he tilts his head upward for a brief second, acknowledging it, then returns his focus to the rhythm of their steps. "You still protect," he says quietly, and this time there is something deeper in his tone, not just recognition, but something close to belief, something that has moved beyond observation into understanding, and Rex's ears flick once more, his posture steady, his presence unchanged, as if the truth of those words has always been there, waiting only to be spoken. They continue forward, the distance stretching out in front of them, not as something unknown, but as something open, something that does not need to be feared or avoided, and with each step, the line between what was lost and what remains becomes less defined, replaced by something simpler, something stronger, something that exists not in sight, but in trust. And as Daniel's hand drifts once more to rest lightly against Rex's shoulder, the connection between them feels no longer new, no longer fragile, but steady, grounded, and real, like something that was never meant to be broken, only waiting to be found again. The rhythm between them no longer feels new. It feels remembered, as if something long buried has found its way back to the surface without needing to be taught again. And Daniel walks with a steadiness that does not come from certainty in the world around him, but from trust in the presence beside him, his hand resting lightly against Rex's shoulder, not guiding, not directing, just connected, and Rex moves with the same quiet precision, his steps measured, his awareness extending beyond what is immediately in front of them, catching the subtle shifts in sound and space that Daniel cannot see but can feel through the dog's adjustments. The open area stretches wider now, the sounds of the shelter fully behind them, replaced by the distant hum of a neighborhood settling into late afternoon, a car passing somewhere beyond the trees, the faint bark of another dog carried on the wind, the soft creak of branches moving gently overhead, and Daniel tilts his head slightly as he listens, mapping it all, building a picture that exists without sight, a picture shaped by sound, by texture, by presence. Rex slows just slightly, his ears angling forward, catching something ahead that has not yet reached Daniel, and his body shifts in a subtle arc, guiding Daniel a few inches to the left, away from a shallow dip in the ground where the grass thins and the soil beneath becomes uneven, and Daniel follows instinctively, his foot landing on firmer ground, his balance adjusting without hesitation, and he exhales softly, recognizing the correction not as interference, but as care. "You catch things before they happen," he says quietly, his voice thoughtful, and Rex continues forward, steady, as if the statement is simply an observation of what has always been true. A new sound emerges, closer now, the low rhythmic thump of a basketball bouncing against pavement, followed by the soft echo of sneakers moving quickly across a court somewhere off to the right, and Rex pauses, his posture still, assessing the direction, the distance, the movement, and Daniel stops with him, not questioning, not resisting, just waiting, and a moment later, a stray ball rolls across the edge of their path, slow, harmless, but unexpected, and Rex shifts slightly, placing himself between Daniel and the movement, not blocking, not reacting with force, just positioning, and the ball comes to rest a few feet away, the sound fading into stillness. A voice calls out from a distance, a teenager jogging over, his footsteps quick but light, and he retrieves the ball with a brief apology, his tone casual, unaware of the significance of the moment he just passed through. And as he moves away, the sound of his steps fades again into the background, and Rex relaxes, his posture easing back into that quiet alignment beside Daniel. "You saw it before I heard it," Daniel murmurs, and there is something in his voice now that carries more than recognition, something like appreciation, something like trust fully formed, and Rex's tail shifts once, a small motion that does not seek attention, does not need acknowledgement, but carries meaning all the same. They continue forward, the space around them widening further, the sounds becoming more layered but less intrusive, blending into a steady background that no longer disrupts their movement, and Daniel's steps grow more fluid, less deliberate, his body no longer bracing for uncertainty, but moving through it with a quiet confidence that builds with each second. The ground beneath them changes again, transitioning from grass to a narrow paved path, the texture smoother, more consistent, and Rex adjusts his pace just slightly, allowing Daniel to feel the difference, to settle into the new rhythm before continuing. And Daniel nods faintly, not out of habit, but out of understanding, his awareness now tuned not just to the world around him, but to the subtle language of the dog beside him. "You never stopped working," he says softly, and this time the words carry something deeper, something that reaches beyond the present moment into the past neither of them speaks about. And Rex walks on, steady, as if the truth of that statement requires no response. A breeze passes again, cooler now as the sun begins to lower, brushing across Daniel's face, carrying with it the faint scent of evening beginning to settle in, and he inhales it slowly, grounding himself in the moment, in the path, in the presence beside him, and for a brief second, the weight of everything that once felt lost seems to shift, not disappearing, but redistributing into something more manageable, something shared. They reach a point where the path curves gently, the direction changing just enough to be noticed, and Rex slows, his body angling slightly to guide the turn, and Daniel follows without hesitation, his step aligning naturally with the new direction, his movement now less about careful navigation and more about quiet trust. And as they round the curve, the sounds of the open space shift again, revealing a quieter stretch ahead, fewer voices, less movement, a place where the air feels stiller, calmer. Daniel's hand rests more firmly now against Rex's shoulder, not gripping, not holding, but grounded in a way that feels natural, and he exhales softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think you chose me," he says, and the words settle into the space between them, not as a question, not as a doubt, but as a realization, and Rex continues beside him, unchanged, steady, as if the truth of that statement has already been accepted long before it was spoken. The path stretches forward, quiet and open, and with each step, the connection between them deepens, not through effort, not through instruction, but through something simpler, something that does not need to be taught or proven, something that exists in the space between movement and trust. And as they walk, side by side, the world no longer feels like something to navigate alone, but something to move through together, one step at a time. The curve of the path settles into a straight line again, and with it, something inside Daniel steadies even further, as if each step has been quietly aligning pieces of him that once felt scattered, and Rex continues beside him, his movement unchanged, consistent, purposeful, the kind of presence that does not demand attention but reshapes everything simply by being there. And the world around them grows quieter now, the distant sounds of people and movement fading into a soft background hum, replaced by the gentle rhythm of wind moving through trees and the faint whisper of grass brushing against itself. Daniel's steps grow more fluid, less measured, his body no longer anticipating imbalance, no longer bracing for uncertainty, and his hand remains near Rex's shoulder, not for support alone, but because it feels right, because the connection between them has become something natural, something that does not need to be thought about anymore. A small shift in the air catches Rex's attention, subtle but distinct, the faint creak of wood under weight somewhere ahead, followed by the soft, rhythmic tap of something light, and his ears angle forward, his posture adjusting just slightly. And Daniel feels it instantly, the change in alignment, the quiet signal that something is different, something approaching, and he slows without needing to be told, his awareness expanding to match the dog's. The sound becomes clearer, a man walking with a cane, the steady tap against the pavement marking each step with quiet precision, and Rex adjusts their path just enough to give space, guiding Daniel a few inches to the side, creating a clear passage without interruption. And as the man passes, there is a brief pause, a moment where two separate rhythms align, two lives moving through the same space in different ways, and the man nods softly. A gesture felt more than seen, before continuing on, his footsteps fading into the distance. Daniel exhales quietly, something about that moment settling deeper than expected, and he tilts his head slightly, his voice low, thoughtful. "We both learned to listen differently," he says, not expecting an answer, not needing one, and Rex walks beside him, steady, as if the understanding itself is enough. The path ahead opens into a small clearing, the air warmer here, the sunlight less obstructed by trees, and Daniel feels it immediately, the shift in temperature brushing across his face, the subtle difference in how sound carries in a more open space, and he slows again, not out of hesitation, but to take it in, to understand it, and Rex remains beside him, still, grounded, allowing the moment to settle fully before moving again. "This is new for both of us," Daniel murmurs, and there is something in his voice now that carries a quiet acceptance, not of limitation, but of possibility, and Rex's tail moves once, slow, steady, a motion that reflects not excitement, but presence, contentment without excess. A faint rustling sound emerges from the edge of the clearing, something small moving through the grass, and Rex's attention shifts instantly, his body aligning between Daniel and the sound, not with urgency, not with tension, but with awareness sharpened into instinct, and Daniel feels it, the subtle repositioning, the protective arc forming without force, and he stops, trusting the signal without question. The sound passes, light and quick, perhaps a small animal moving through the brush, and Rex remains still until it fades completely, his posture relaxing only when the space returns to quiet. And then, just as naturally, he resumes, guiding Daniel forward with the same calm precision that has defined every step since they left the shelter. "You do not guess," Daniel says softly, his voice carrying a quiet certainty. "You know." And Rex continues beside him, unchanged, as if the truth of that statement has always been present, waiting only to be recognized. The breeze shifts again, carrying with it the distant scent of something cooking, faint but warm, perhaps from a nearby house or a small food stand further down the street, and Daniel smiles slightly, a small, genuine expression that does not need to be seen to be understood, and he inhales deeply, letting the scent anchor him further into the present moment, into the reality that is unfolding around him. They reach the far edge of the clearing, where the path narrows again, transitioning back into a more defined walkway, and Rex slows just enough to signal the change, his body aligning with the new direction, and Daniel follows instinctively, his step adjusting without hesitation, his movement now fully synchronized with the dog beside him. "I thought I lost direction," Daniel says quietly, his voice softer now, carrying something deeper, something more personal. "But maybe I just had not met it yet." And the words settle into the space between them, not heavy, not burdened, but honest, and Rex walks on, steady, as if the statement itself is simply another truth being placed where it belongs. The light begins to shift as the sun lowers further, the warmth softening into something cooler, more reflective, and Daniel feels it in the air. In the way the space around him seems to slow, to settle, and he takes another step, then another, each one grounded, certain, no longer shaped by what he cannot see, but by what he has come to understand, and beside him, Rex continues, not as something feared, not as something misunderstood, but as something trusted, something chosen, something that has found its place again in the quiet act of walking forward together, one step at a time, into a space that no longer feels uncertain, but open. The narrowing path does not feel restrictive. It feels intentional, like a quiet corridor guiding them forward into something more defined. And Daniel senses it not as limitation, but as structure. The way the air channels differently. The way sound becomes more focused, less scattered, and Rex adjusts with that same calm precision, his steps steady, his presence unchanged, as if the environment itself is simply another layer to navigate, not something to resist. Daniel's hand rests more naturally now against Rex's shoulder, no longer hovering, no longer tentative, but grounded, a point of connection that feels as steady as the rhythm of their steps. And with each movement, the distance between uncertainty and trust continues to dissolve, replaced by something quieter, something stronger. The late afternoon begins to shift toward evening, the air cooling just enough to be noticed, the warmth of the sun softening into a gentler presence. And Daniel inhales slowly, feeling the change settle into his chest, grounding him further in the moment, in the space, in the presence beside him. And Rex remains aligned, his body moving with the same quiet purpose, his awareness extending beyond what is immediately visible, catching the subtle changes that shape their path. A faint sound rises ahead, low and steady, the distant rumble of traffic growing slightly louder as they approach a road that runs parallel to the path. And Rex's posture shifts almost imperceptibly, his body angling just enough to guide Daniel farther from the edge, creating space without urgency, without force. And Daniel follows instinctively, his steps aligning with that subtle correction, his trust now complete. No longer forming, no longer testing, but simply present. "You do not need to show it," Daniel murmurs, his voice calm, reflective. "You just do it." And Rex continues beside him, steady, as if the statement itself is enough, as if recognition has replaced the need for proof. The path curves slightly again, this time toward a quieter section bordered by a low wooden fence, its presence marked by the faint scent of aged timber and the soft creak it carries when touched by wind. And Daniel slows just slightly, sensing the boundary, the shift in space, and Rex mirrors the adjustment, his body maintaining that same quiet alignment, guiding without directing, supporting without controlling. A sound emerges from behind them, light but purposeful, footsteps approaching at a measured pace. And Rex pauses, his posture still, his ears angled back just enough to catch the direction, the distance. And Daniel stops with him, not questioning, not reacting, just waiting. And a woman passes by on their left, her footsteps steady, her breathing even, the faint rustle of fabric brushing against itself as she moves. And she offers a soft greeting as she passes, her voice warm, acknowledging, without interrupting. And Daniel nods slightly in response. The gesture subtle but present, and Rex remains still until the space clears again, then resumes, guiding Daniel forward with the same calm precision. "You hold the space," Daniel says quietly, his voice thoughtful, and there is something in the way he says it that carries understanding beyond words. And Rex walks on, steady, as if the truth of that statement has always been there, waiting to be spoken. The ground beneath them shifts again, the smoothness of the path interrupted by a slight rise, a gentle incline that requires a small adjustment in balance. And Rex slows just enough to signal it, his body grounding slightly more with each step, allowing Daniel to feel the change before committing fully. And Daniel responds instinctively, his stride adjusting, his weight shifting forward just enough to meet the incline without strain. And he exhales softly, a breath that carries both effort and ease. The sounds of the world continue. Around them, distant, layered, but no longer overwhelming, no longer something to navigate alone. And Daniel's movement reflects that, his posture steady, his steps confident, his presence grounded in something that no longer feels uncertain. "I thought silence meant absence," he says after a moment, his voice quieter now, carrying something deeper. "But maybe it just means you have to listen differently." And the words settle into the space between them, not as a realization forced into place, but as something discovered, something that has grown naturally with each step they have taken together. Rex's ears flick once, his posture unchanged, his presence steady, as if the meaning of those words is understood without needing acknowledgement. And they continue forward, the path stretching ahead, quiet and open, the fading light softening the edges of the world into something calm, something reflective. Daniel's hand moves slightly, fingers brushing against the fur at Rex's shoulder, not searching, not confirming, just present, and he exhales slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You did not fail," he says, and there is something in those words that carries weight, not just for the dog beside him, but for himself as well, a quiet release of something long held, something that no longer needs to be carried alone. Rex walks on, steady, unchanged, as if the truth of that statement requires no response, and together they move forward, their steps aligned, their presence shared, the world no longer something to navigate in isolation, but something to move through side by side, guided not by sight, but by trust, by awareness, by the quiet understanding that sometimes what the world fears is simply what it has not taken the time to understand. And in that understanding, something is restored, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the simple, steady act of continuing forward together. The light continues to soften, not disappearing, but settling into a quieter presence that stretches long across the ground. And Daniel feels it in the way the air cools against his skin, in the way the sounds around him grow gentler, less hurried, as if the world itself is beginning to exhale after a long day, and Rex remains beside him, steady, grounded, his movement unchanged, his awareness constant, the same quiet vigilance that has carried them through every step now unfolding into something that feels less like duty and more like belonging. The path beneath them becomes smoother again, the texture consistent, familiar, and Daniel's stride reflects that, more fluid now, less measured, his body no longer negotiating every step, but moving through them with a calm assurance that did not exist before, and his hand rests lightly against Rex's shoulder, not out of necessity, but out of connection, a quiet point of contact that feels as natural as breathing. A faint sound emerges from ahead, soft at first, then clearer, the gentle trickle of water moving over stone, and Daniel tilts his head slightly, listening, mapping the sound as it grows, and Rex adjusts their path just slightly, guiding him toward it without urgency, without force, as if understanding that this is not something to avoid, but something to approach. And as they move closer, the air shifts, carrying with it a cooler, fresher scent, the unmistakable presence of water nearby. They reach the edge of a small fountain set into the ground, its structure simple, circular, the water flowing steadily from its center, creating a soft, continuous sound that fills the space without overwhelming it. And Daniel pauses, the sound anchoring him in a way that feels immediate, familiar, and he steps closer, guided by Rex's steady presence, until he can feel the faint mist against his skin, the subtle coolness rising from the surface. He lowers his hand slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the stone, then dipping gently into the water, and the sensation is immediate, clear, grounding, and he exhales softly, a breath that carries something deeper than relief, something closer to recognition, as if this simple moment has connected him to something he had not realized he was missing. Rex stands beside him, still, his posture relaxed, his attention steady but not tense, as if he understands that this is a pause, a moment that does not require guidance, only presence, and Daniel lets his fingers remain in the water for a second longer before withdrawing them, the droplets cooling quickly against his skin as the air moves gently around them. "You brought me here," he says quietly, and there is something in his voice now that carries more than observation, more than understanding, something that feels like gratitude, not spoken loudly, not emphasized, but present all the same. And Rex's tail shifts once, a slow, steady motion that reflects nothing more than quiet acknowledgement. The sounds of the world continue beyond the fountain, distant traffic, soft voices carried on the wind, the faint rustle of leaves, but within this space, there is a stillness that feels separate, contained, as if time itself has slowed just enough to allow something important to settle fully into place. Daniel straightens slowly, his posture relaxed, his breath even, and he turns slightly, orienting himself not by sight, but by the presence beside him, by the steady rhythm that has guided him this far, and his hand returns once more to rest lightly against Rex's shoulder, not searching, not confirming, just present. "I used to think everything had to be seen to be real," he says softly, his voice thoughtful, reflective. "But this is clearer than anything I ever saw." and the words settle into the space between them, not as a declaration, but as a quiet truth, something discovered rather than decided. Rex remains beside him, unchanged, steady, his presence constant, as if the meaning of those words requires no response, because it has already been lived in every step they have taken together. A breeze passes through again, gentle, carrying with it the faint scent of evening settling in, the warmth of the day fading into something cooler, more reflective, and Daniel inhales it slowly, grounding himself in the moment, in the space, in the presence beside him, and for a brief second, the weight of everything that once felt uncertain seems to shift completely, not disappearing, but transforming into something lighter, something shared. He takes a step back from the fountain, his movement steady, his posture aligned, and Rex moves with him, matching the step, maintaining that same quiet alignment. And as they begin to walk again, the path ahead does not feel unknown. It feels open, not because it has changed, but because he has, because something within him has found its place again, not through sight, not through control, but through trust, through understanding, through the quiet realization that sometimes what we fear, what we misunderstand, what we turn away from, is not something to be avoided, but something waiting to be seen in a different way. And as Daniel walks forward, with Rex beside him, steady and present, the world no longer feels like something he has to navigate alone, but something he can move through, one step at a time, guided by something that does not need to be seen to be known. The path stretches forward in quiet certainty, no longer something to be questioned, no longer something to be feared, and Daniel walks with a steadiness that feels different from anything he has known before, not because the world has become simpler, but because something inside him has, something that no longer needs to see to believe, something that has learned to trust what it can feel, what it can hear, what it can hold on to without hesitation. And beside him, Rex remains constant, his presence unwavering, his steps aligned, his purpose no longer hidden beneath misunderstanding, but revealed in the simplest way possible, by staying. The air continues to cool as evening settles in, the warmth of the day giving way to a gentler stillness, and the sounds around them soften, fewer voices now, fewer movements, the world easing into a quieter rhythm that matches the calm between them, and Daniel breathes it in, slow and steady, each inhale grounding him deeper into the moment, into the path, into the presence beside him that has changed everything without asking for anything in return. His hand rests against Rex's shoulder, not out of need, not out of uncertainty, but because it belongs there now, because the connection between them has become something natural, something unspoken yet undeniable, and with each step, the distance between who he was when he entered the shelter and who he is now becomes clearer, not through sight, but through understanding. They reach the end of the path where it meets a quiet street, the pavement stretching out in front of them, empty for the moment, the faint hum of distant traffic carried far enough away to feel present but not intrusive, and Rex slows, his posture steady, his awareness expanding just slightly, scanning the space before them in that same quiet way he has done since the beginning, and Daniel stops with him, not questioning, not hesitating, just waiting, trusting the pause as much as the movement. A car passes at a distance, the sound rising and fading, and Rex remains still until the space settles again, his body easing only when the moment is clear, and then he steps forward, guiding Daniel across the quiet stretch of pavement with the same calm precision, and Daniel follows without hesitation, his step aligned, his trust complete, because there is nothing left to prove, nothing left to question. On the other side, they stop again, not because they have to, but because something about the stillness calls for it. Something about the moment feels complete, and Daniel exhales slowly, his voice quiet, almost reflective, as if speaking more to the space than to the dog beside him. "I thought I came here to find help," he says, his words steady, unforced. "But maybe I came here to find you." And the sentence does not carry surprise, does not carry doubt, only a quiet acceptance of something that has already taken shape. Rex stands beside him, unchanged, steady, his presence as grounded as it has been since the first moment they stood in that cold kennel. But now it feels different, not because he has changed, but because he has been seen, truly seen, not through fear, not through assumption, but through understanding. The breeze moves again, soft and steady, carrying with it the faint scent of night approaching, and Daniel tilts his head slightly, feeling it, letting it pass over him. And for a moment, there is nothing else, no past, no expectation, no weight beyond what can be held in this single breath, in this single step, in this shared presence that has grown into something neither of them needed to name to understand. He lowers his hand, briefly, then lifts it again, resting it once more against Rex's shoulder, a quiet affirmation, a gesture that says everything without needing words, and he takes a step forward, not because he has to, but because he wants to, because the path ahead no longer feels uncertain, it feels open, it feels possible. Rex moves with him, not ahead, not behind, but beside, exactly where he has chosen to be, exactly where he belongs, and together they continue, their steps aligned, their movements steady, the world around them no longer something to navigate alone, but something to move through.